Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. The fight continues on for the strategically critical Ukrainian town of Pokrovsk. While Russia says its forces advanced in the city's ruins, Ukraine says Pokrovsk defenders remain defiant in face of adversity. We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, some other top stories of today. Prospective populist Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babis signs government coalition deal with far-right Eurosceptics, sparking concern for the future of Czech support for Ukraine. Serbian president offers to bring forward snap parliamentary elections amid widespread anti-government protests. Polish inflation falls further in October against expectations that it would hold steady. And we begin with the latest from Ukraine. As the Russian offensive of a strategic location of Pokrovsk continues, it's all hands on deck for Ukraine as it fends off the Russian advances in the region. Pokrovsk is not only a place that suffers from constant attacks, as other regions, including Zaporizhzhia, home to one of Europe's largest nuclear power plants, are also targeted. Our defense correspondent Zuzanna Jurek has the latest.
Ukrainian eyes are fixed to the city of Pokrovsk, where the Kremlin claims an imminent victory. With deep state aerial images showing Russia making small but incremental gains within 24-hour timeframes. For over a year, Russian attempts appeared insufficient. General Alexander Syrsky of the Ukrainian Armed Forces noted that all hands are on deck to fend off the sudden advance.
The situation is difficult, but Russian propaganda claims about the alleged blockade of the Ukrainian defense forces in Pokrovsk, as in Kupiansk, they do not correspond to reality.
And each inch that Russia laboriously grabs in order to establish control over the Donetsk region costs Ukraine parts of its major supply routes.
It becomes more difficult for logistics to resupply them with UAVs, with munitions, whatever. So Pokrovsk could be a really important kind of informational win for Russia, and also an operational kind of success.
Though Kiev continues to push back, deploying a special forces unit to strengthen the city's defenses, experts note.
Ukraine has been, Ukrainian officials have been saying that it is a precarious situation for Ukraine there at the moment, and with Russia allocating more resources, it is a pivotal moment.
And this isn't the only place where Russia continues its assaults, repeatedly striking Ukraine's nuclear energy facilities.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine strongly condemns Russia's deliberate strikes against substations whose stable operation ensures the reliable external power supply of Ukrainian nuclear power plants. Deliberate strikes on civilian energy facilities that directly affect the safe operation of nuclear installations bear the hallmarks of nuclear terrorism and constitute a grave violation of international humanitarian law, in particular, the principles of distinction and proportionality.
What has changed when it comes to Russia's behavior is not just a sort of change when it comes to whether or not to damage nuclear facilities connected to nuclear power plants. It is much more fundamental than that, which is that Russia has essentially decided that it doesn't care.
Ukrainian forces managed to secure successes, including striking the Saratov oil refinery.
That's why we need tomahawks.
Whilst faced with yet another political setback, as US President Donald Trump decided to once again change his tune on providing Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles.
Administration provide Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk missiles? Is that something that you're not considering that?
No, not really.
Mr. President, on Friday,
Could happen, I could change, but at this moment I'm not.
Which, as experts point out, could provide the necessary advantage in swinging the balance of power.
The front line is not much moving anyway. There are these death zones between the two armies, but the war is now, to a large extent, being fought with these long-range weapons.
The Kremlin readies to claim imminent victory, but Ukraine keeps pushing on. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Another breakthrough in an attempt to target Russia's energy sector. According to the latest reports, Turkey decreased their purchases of Russian oil as a result of U.S. sanctions. Since the outbreak of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Turkey has been the third biggest importer of Russian crude after China and India. What effect is it going to have on Russia's war economy? Jakub Kapiszewski and Konrad Gorlinski have the details.
Another day, another lost customer. Turkish refineries are finally ditching Russian crude.
Donald Trump asked countries like Bulgaria, like Slovakia, Hungary and Turkey to end reliance on Russian supply. It will take time, but we see the diversification has started.
Turkey saw its supply of Russian crude rise significantly after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But now, the risk of getting hit with secondary sanctions forced the two biggest refiners in the country, Azeri-owned SOCAR and Turkish Tüpraş, to turn to alternative suppliers like Iraq or Kazakhstan.
Turkish refinery that you have mentioned started to import oil outside of Russia, and it is a changing behavior. And to make it a long-term commitment, we would need to see a full enforcement of U.S. sanctions.
Turkey is just another example of how impactful the U.S. sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil have been. To date, they've forced Lukoil to sell its international holdings and have called into question the supply to longtime Russian customers like Hungary. India, Russian crude purchaser number 2 in the world, has also started to slowly turn away from the commodity.
How does this fit in?
Experts warn, however, that this trend may reverse if sanction enforcement is lacking.
We'll see how Americans behave if someone is breaking those sanctions regime, if they are imposing secondary sanctions. If they do so, this trend would be sustained. If not, the customers could go back to Russian supplies.
However, Turkish refiners are already saying that they won't move away from Russian crude entirely. Turkey is also a major consumer of Russian natural gas due to 2 pipelines connecting the two countries. All in all, Turkey was the 3rd largest importer of Russian fossil fuels in September, stuffing Kremlin coffers with €2.6 billion.
Monday brought about significant developments in the Czech Republic as the new government coalition deal was signed. Andrej Babis's ANO party will work hand-in-hand with the far-right Freedom for Democracy and populist Motorists. As the final squad of the cabinet remains to be confirmed, the new government represents a position of lukewarm support for Ukraine compared to the outgoing cabinet of Petr Fiala. TVP World's Andrew Sweeney is in Prague and brings us more on the latest developments.
Well, the new coalition agreement signals what was already forecast for quite some time. Andrej Babis and his ANO party did not win enough seats at parliamentary elections in October to form a majority on their own. To do that, they are now having to form an agreement with the far-right SPD, Freedom and Democracy Party, and the populist newcomers to Czech politics, the Motorists. The presence of the SPD has proven controversial in the Czech Republic, as the party has often called for Czechsit, a referenda on leaving both the EU and NATO. It also favours closer ties with Russia and has been very much against continued support for both Ukraine and for Ukrainian refugees living in the Czech Republic. However, Andrej Babis has made it very clear that there will be no Czechsit anytime soon. Earlier today, I spoke with the nominee for the Health Minister of the Czech Republic and a previous Health Minister under Andrej Babis's first administration, Adam Wojtek, who said to me that the Czech Republic's foreign policy will not change that much altogether.
So there's no discussion about some kind of like a referendum on leaving either the European Union or NATO. We believe that the EU should support Ukraine, and we should support Ukraine through the EU mechanism and the NATO.
Tommy Okamura, the leader of the SPD, is one of the more notable personalities in this new coalition government. Born in Japan to a Czech mother, he has long been on the fringes of Czech politics. Now he's becoming the president or the speaker of the Czech Chamber of Deputies, the 3rd most important position in the Czech constitution. Okamura and the SPD's campaign during the election season was criticised for demonising Ukrainians, and the party has made it very clear that it wants to halt all support to Ukraine entirely.
It is true that the topic of Ukrainians was a very major topic during those elections, and it was manipulated a lot by different power parties, especially by populist parties. And it's a very interesting phenomenon that I would like to bring up, that in these elections, in the Czech Republic, as well as in neighboring countries during recent elections, the topic of Ukraine became internalized. So when we're talking about regular elections, the topic of other countries is an external issue, an external politics. But here, when politicians were mentioning Ukraine and Ukrainians, they were mentioning them in the same sentences with internal issues, for example, social welfare and social benefits, schools, the education system.
Now that the Czech coalition agreement is in place, the next stage in the constitutional process can begin, and that's actually forming the government. Each of the parties in this new coalition will nominate people to become ministers, and they then have to be approved by Czech President Petr Fiala. They do not have to be MPs. The SPD will nominate independent experts. The Motorists will not. Their candidate for the foreign minister post, Filip Turek, has already drawn considerable controversy due to his social media presence. So now that the parliament is settled, the government will now begin to be formed. Andrej Babis predicts it could take until December for that to happen. For TVP World, Andrej Sweeney.
Following the one-year anniversary of the Novi Sad tragedy and the protest that followed in Serbia's capital, Belgrade, Sunday was defined by unrest with 37 people arrested. And while that is taking place, President Aleksandar Vučić is playing for time, promising early elections to ease tensions without providing a date when the said elections should take place. Our Balkans correspondent Paweł Trzaskowski is on the ground and joins us live. Good evening, Paweł. So give us an update on how the situation is right now. I mean, on Sunday we saw some tensions rising. Is that the case today?
Well, Claudia, I believe you can hear music playing in the background, but I wouldn't like it to misguide you. The atmosphere here today in front of the parliament in Belgrade is far from cheerful. The music is coming from the camp of the supporters of the ruling SNS party and the country's president Aleksandar Vučić. After each song ends, there is booing coming from the other side. These are the anti-government supporters who have gathered here for a second consecutive night. Tonight, a smaller crowd. However, over the years since the movement was created, the number of protesters have only been growing. Please listen.
There is many research, many surveys which are showing that 1/3 or 1/2 of Serbian population joined some kind of protest during last year. So from that perspective, for sure, somehow it's dangerous for him. But like I mentioned before, behind his regime, as I might say, it's a lot of state resources, media control, and also some kind of, let's say, corruption.
And this corruption is one of the things that the protesters are opposing. One of their demands is calling for snap elections. Claudia?
Exactly, snap elections. And what about President Vučić? I mean, are we ever going to see those mystical early elections going to take place and materialize? What's the news?
Well, Claudia, the President Vučić indeed yesterday said that he is ready to hold snap elections. However, this is hardly any news. He has been floating the idea for some time now, and yesterday he again failed to give a specific date as to when these elections would be held. Therefore, he keeps failing to appease the protest movement. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Paweł. That was Paweł Trzaskowski reporting live from Belgrade. It's time to change locations and move to Brussels, as the EU is set to publish its latest enlargement report, laying out the progress that prospective members have made in joining the bloc, Serbia included. And as the race for the Western Balkans continues, Kaja Kallas is paying a visit to Bosnia and Herzegovina, one of the candidate countries. For more on the report and accession expectations from Brussels, here's our Europe correspondent, Alex Kadier.
Well, those countries hoping to join the European Union are about to get their report card. Top of the class, Montenegro and Albania, a population of 3 million between them. They will be warmly congratulated by the Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kos, we understand, in the next 24 hours about the progress they have made and the reforms they have made to join the European Union. Clearly having successes on their road to the EU. Montenegro, clearly top of the class, expecting perhaps some kind of accession by 2027. Less news, however, for Ukraine and Moldova. Their accession process is linked to one another. That, of course, blocked by Hungary. No clear solution, but nevertheless, the European Commission keen to warmly congratulate those two countries as well, despite the fact that the EU does not have a solution yet, to have them move forward in the process. And bottom of the class, likely to be criticized by the European Commissioner tomorrow, Bosnia and Herzegovina as well as Serbia. We'll start with Bosnia. There is a risk there of losing the accession process. That was a warning shot fired by the EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas in a visit to the country.
It is the best guarantee of a brighter future for the country. Windows of enlargement of the European Union are very rarely open, but one is open now. Your political leaders have to grab this opportunity, or the window of opportunity will close again.
And as we've heard in our previous reporting, those pro-democracy protests in Serbia, and particularly President Vucic's administration's response to those pro-democracy protests, part of a bleak picture for Serbia's hopes of joining the European Union. We expect harsh words from Marta Kos from the European Commission against the government in Belgrade. Clearly the road to the European Union, not a clear and not an easy one for Serbia. That will be a long, hard road. Some will be celebrated, some will be criticized, all will get their report card. In Brussels, I'm Alex Cadye for TVP World.
Even though the Hungarian parliamentary elections are not set to take place until April 2026, the emotions are running high as the country is experiencing a major shift in political sentiment. Recent polls show Petr Fiala's TISA positioned itself ahead of Orbán's Fidesz as the party is suffering a blowback from the declining economy. How did TISA manage to sway potential voters? In Sonia Gatabiszczan's report.
Viktor Orbán versus Péter Magyar. These are likely the main characters ahead of Hungary's April 2026 parliamentary elections. And the polls are increasingly favoring Magyar's TISA party, leaving Orbán's Fidesz trailing behind. In the view of the former Hungarian foreign minister, it is things like the country's declining economy that could cost the current prime minister the elections.
His governance was declining and rather quality. In particular in the field of economy. So there is no economic growth. This government is in danger because there is a real threat on behalf of a new challenger, the TISA party, led by Péter Magyar.
And as the US President Donald Trump imposed
tremendous sanctions
on Russian oil, Hungary, which according to the Atlantic Council sources 86% of its crude oil from Russia, faces increasing economic pressure.
If we have to pay more, even double, for oil and gas, then we cannot pass it on to people at the current reduced utility prices. So, those who want a reduction in utility costs, we must protect Hungary's right to buy oil and gas from the Russians.
Magyar's rise to popularity has even brought to light internal tensions in the Fidesz camp. According to the Hungarian news outlet Telex, some party members see their political opponent as, quote, the good Fidesz, like the non-corrupt Fidesz. The party members further alleged that Orbán's anti-Ukraine campaign, featuring statements like these,
the accession of Ukraine to the European Union cannot be allowed now,
does not work as well as it used to. What is more, Fidesz's campaigning tools took another hit as the EU's regulation on political advertising came into effect in October. With political ads now requiring a transparency label, Meta, Google and Microsoft have dropped political ads altogether, signaling bad news for Fidesz.
They realize that we have only 6 months to the elections, and they probably lost their most important advertising place. Facebook, and Google Ads.
According to a 2024 report by Political Capital and Independent Analytical Center, Fidesz was Google's biggest advertiser in the EU, heavily relying on promotion for reach in general.
Without money, without advertising, their videos and their propaganda products are really not seen by the people. So their traffic was dropped by 96%.
For comparison, ahead of their general election, all political parties in the Czech Republic spent less than 500,000 euro on Facebook advertising combined. During the same period, Fidesz and its proxy spent almost 2.5 million euro. Consequently, Orban looks at the approaching meeting with Trump as the last glimmer of hope, planning to convince him that Hungary should be exempt from the US sanctions on Russian oil.
He has asked for an exemption. We haven't granted one, but he has asked. Victor, he's a friend of mine.
But whether a friend in need is a friend indeed will become clearer when the two meet on November 7th. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabiszczyn.
And now a closer look at the Polish economy. In another sign of good news, inflation in Poland fell further in October against expectations that it would hold steady. That could give consumers a boost of confidence and the central bank greater flexibility in setting interest rates. Our reporter Maciej Wilowski has more.
Inflation in Poland is trending lower. Consumer price inflation in Poland fell to 2.8% in October against expectations that it would hold steady at 2.9%. It was 5% at this time last year. Compared to neighboring CEE countries, only the Czech Republic has a lower inflation rate. But the biggest surprise came from core inflation, an indicator that is more closely watched by policymakers at the central bank.
Core inflation is an important indicator because it filters out the most volatile items from the inflation indicator.
Core inflation was recorded at 2.9% last month, the lowest in nearly 6 years. Falling energy prices, slowing wage growth, and the strong performance of Poland's currency have helped bring down inflation in recent months.
Polish currency is relatively strong, especially versus the dollar, and over the last 2 years has appreciated significantly. That helps to lower the prices of imported goods.
Lower than expected inflation could prompt officials at the National Bank of Poland, the nation's central bank, to lower interest rates faster than originally anticipated.
Until the data was released, we were assuming that there will be no interest rate cuts in November or December this year, and the central bank will rather wait until the first quarter of 2026.
Instead, the next cut, which would be the fifth rate cut of 2025, could come as soon as Wednesday when the NBP's Monetary Policy Council concludes its next meeting.
I think that the chances of the rate cut increased from around 30% to around 50%.
Lower interest rates reduce the costs of borrowing money for households and businesses, boosting the economy. At the same time, lower inflation could lead to greater consumer confidence and willingness to spend, which could also speed up growth. Slowing inflation is another good sign for the Polish economy and could help sustain its current expansion. Maciej Wilowski for TVP World.
And now returning to our main story of tonight, the situation around the Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk. The strategically vital settlement in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region is the focus of an intensified Russian offensive, and its fate could influence the direction of the war. To discuss this, I'm joined by General Ben Hodges, former commander of U.S. Army Europe and Africa. General, thank you so much for joining me on the program. It's great to see you again.
Thank you for the privilege.
So on one hand, Russians are claiming victory in Pokrovsk. Meanwhile, Ukrainians are trying to push back on what is an intensified offensive on Russia's part. What is your assessment? Is Pokrovsk falling?
Well, you know, the Russians back last summer thought that they were going to get Pokrovsk, and people were predicting July of 2024 that it was going to fall. And here we are in November of 2025. Nothing is left in Pokrovsk except just rubble. And so at some point, the Ukrainians may make the decision to withdraw what's there because it's no longer worth hanging on to. But I think that the Russians have paid an enormous price for what once was an important city. Now, I don't know that it's worth continuing to defend. So it's hard to know. The confusion of combat exactly what's going on, but what's for certain is that the Russians have paid an enormous price, and it's taken them over a year just to go as far as they have.
You described the city as a pile of rubble, and yet the fight continues between Ukraine and Russia over that city. So if Russia claims definite victory, what will be the significance for Ukraine? Could this fall of this city mean the beginning of an end for Ukraine in this conflict?
Absolutely not. No. Look, Russia is using everything they have after more than a year just to finally capture Pokrovsk. And then I would ask the question, okay, once they capture Pokrovsk, then what? I mean, what will they do if they capture Pokrovsk? They don't have the capability to exploit whatever success they might have here. So the Ukrainians, if the Ukrainians decide to pull back from what they have now, they'll fall back to another defense line, and there will be nothing left for Russia to do except occupy what is a pile of rubble, anti-tank ditches and barbed wire, and a lot of unexploded ordnance. So it will take them a long time to even resume offensive operations if they do capture Pokrovsk. So I think this is anything but good news for Russia.
So you say that Pokrovsk actually doesn't have much significance for Putin, because why is he pressuring so much?
Well, of course, for Vladimir Putin, he's desperate for any good news. He doesn't have much he can tell his population about what this huge investment and cost is accomplishing for Russia. He of course will claim a huge victory if it happens, and he'll talk about they've captured more of the Donbass, but at the end of the day, this war is not about terrain. It's about momentum. It's about whether or not which side is going to collapse first. And I think the Ukrainians have figured out that if they can continue to destroy Russia's oil and gas infrastructure, Russia cannot continue to pay for this war.
So you said it's about those balances. A lot has been said about Russia's worsening economic prospects. Is the Pokrovsk struggle a sign that Ukraine is also nearing its limits? Or you think just the opposite?
No, the Pokrovsk battle, look, this has been going on for way over a year. I mean, one of the longest battles in history. And right now, the Ukrainians have put the minimum number of troops that they need in there, which I think was a good decision to reduce exposure of soldiers to getting killed by Russian drones and Russian artillery. So I think they have stretched this out probably much longer than anybody anticipated. And so they will, if they decide to pull out, they'll go back to the next defense line. I mean, look at a map and you see that Pokrovsk is in the far, far eastern part of Ukraine. Russia, after 11 and a half years, still only controls about 20% of Ukraine. And so I think we should be clear-eyed about what might happen next. And the Russians do not have the ability to exploit what's there. Ukraine, on the other hand, has changed the momentum of the war by going after Russia's oil and gas infrastructure. And I think what we're going to see is by sometime next year, on the ground, it's not going to look much different. But at the strategic level, Russia's ability to continue exporting oil to China and India and other customers is going to be dramatically reduced. And I think he is going to have a hard time paying for this war beyond next year.
So it's truly about choking the Russian oil sector.
Exactly. You're exactly right. That's a good way to say it. If the Ukrainians, and we should be helping them, with capability. You saw that the UK just announced they're going to provide a lot more Storm Shadows to Ukraine. I hope that the U.S. Will finally make a decision to provide Tomahawk, although I don't think the Ukrainians expect that to happen. People can be investing in Ukraine's defense industry so they can continue to make more of their own long-range weapons. And we should be stopping these Shadow Fleet vessels that are taking Russian oil out through the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea.
So, I'm very happy that you mentioned, because Bloomberg reported that the UK is in fact transferring additional Storm Shadow cruise missiles to Ukraine. What is the US's role in all of this when it comes to supporting Ukraine? Will the images from Pokrovsk actually change Donald Trump's mind regarding the Tomahawks? We've seen different perspectives. We've heard US President changing his mind on whether or not he's going to supply these long-range missiles. What's your take on it?
Well, I have no confidence that the U.S. president will decide to do something to help Ukraine. Every time he has ever teased about doing it, talked about doing something, and then he ends up backing down from doing it. So I don't know what the president's strategic endgame is. That's what's been missing, is a clear explanation of what is America's strategic objective for this war. And the Ukrainians, I think, no longer hold their breath that the U.S. might do something. So they're turning to European partners and friends who understand that if Ukraine fails, Europe is going to pay an enormous price for it, with millions more refugees and a much larger emboldened Russian army. So I think you're going to see UK, maybe other countries continuing to help Ukraine. But I just don't have any confidence right now that the U.S. is going to do what it should do, which is to help Ukraine win.
General, thank you so much for joining me on the program. Always a pleasure speaking to you. General Ben Hodges, former commander of U.S. Army Europe and Africa, was my guest on the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more news and features in just a moment.